All right, you guys, I am so excited about this journey that we're embarking on, this thing that we're calling the Year of the Story. Last week I gave a preview, or a prequel, if you will. I shared a little bit about myself and a little bit about the book that sort of inspired this journey that we're on. And one of the things that I talked about is this invitation to live a better story. And here's a bedrock principle that we're going to build on throughout our year, that there are particular elements of a story that are used by people like screenwriters and authors, and that if we understand those components, those elements, and we were to apply them to our lives, that we can have the same outcome that happens when screenwriters and authors apply those well, and that is that we can have a meaningful, engaging, compelling story that interests us, that makes a difference, that moves other people. And that's one of the central things that we're going to build on, particularly in this month. And that's a little bit of where we're going through the rest of the month of September. One of the things that I said that I found to be true in my life, which we talked about last week, was that when we experience this invitation, we can't not live a better story. In essence, we can't say no to that invitation. Now, we can do it in the short term, and we do this in all kinds of ways in the short term, where we realize like something needs to change in a relationship or within us in order for us to thrive, to be fully ourselves. But in the long run, we can't say no to it forever. It will just eat us up inside. We can't just decide not to. In story, that illustration is often realized by what's called an inciting incident. That's one of the components of a story. It's the thing that invites the character into the story. And we'll unpack that a little bit more later. But before we do, I want to talk about the first element of that, and that is the character. I want to talk about you. If we are to define a story at its core, and Donald Miller does this in A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, he said simply, story is this. It is a character who wants something and overcomes conflict to get it. That's what we're going to be talking about this month. So this first week, we're talking about a character. We're talking about you. You are the central character in your story. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning as we sort of begin to build this and talk about what our lives can look like. This week is called A Character, and you're that character. The scriptures begin with a conviction that we are made, that we are crafted and created on purpose with purpose. We know this, right? So right at the beginning, Genesis 1, beginning in 26, God has created all that is. We have the earth, we have the day, and we have the night. We have the waters of the sea, and we have all the creatures in them. We have trees and birds of the air. We have land creatures. We have all of this. God has created all of this as an act of love out of nothing. And in this first creation poem in Genesis, we come to the sixth day, the last day that God will create. And it says this, "Then God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over all the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and everything creeping on the earth." And so God created humankind in God's own image. In the image of God, He created them. I love that. I think it's important, in part because then it goes on. And if you remember the poem, at the end of every day, God says it was good, it was good, it was good. And so the scriptures say that God blessed them. And then it says this, "And it was so, God saw everything that had been made, and indeed it was very good. There was evening and morning the sixth day." It is this beautiful notion that you and I have been made, like from the beginning of time to all the people that exist right now, that we have been made in this intentional way, created with purpose, formed and known, and that God looks at us just like God looked at humanity back then and says, this is very good. You see, the thing is that I don't think we always believe that. I don't think we always really trust that fact. But we say it all the time. We say it every week when we celebrate communion at Common Grace. When we go through the liturgy, part of what it says is that we are created, for we are created in your image. And you breathed into us the breath of life. And even when our love fails and we turn away, your love has always remained steadfast. That's a part of the liturgy that we share before we partake in that meal. This reminder that we are made in God's own image, given life by God's own benevolent grace. I love this idea. In the book that I'm referencing throughout this series, Miller puts it like this. He says, I like the part of the Bible that talks about God speaking the world into existence, as though everything that we see and feel were sentences from God's mouth, all wet in the world of his spit. I feel written, my skin feels written, my desires feel written. My sexuality was a word spoken by God that I would have brown hair and brown eyes and come from a womb, all of it. It feels literary, doesn't it? As if we're characters in books. You can call it God or conscious. You can call it, dismiss it as intuitive knowing that all human beings have as living storytellers. But there is a knowing that I feel that guides me towards better stories and being a better character. I believe there is a writer outside of ourselves plotting a better story for us, interacting with us, and even whispering a better story into our consciousness. I love that image. I love that idea of God just speaking, writing all of this into existence, looking at us and saying, this is very good. And this is a profound and persistent belief in our faith and in our scriptures that God loves us and knows us individually and personally. We see it throughout the Old Testament. The prophet Jeremiah talks about it in a couple of ways really beautifully. Right at the beginning of Jeremiah, he puts these words into God's mouth and says this, that before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you, I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. And that's his specific call, that prophet to the nations. But the notion, the idea is that the same is for all of us. By the way, Jeremiah says, no, I don't think that's true. I'm a young man. I have no words. And God says, don't say I have no words. Sometimes we look at all of these things and we say, maybe God made you, pastor. Maybe God made somebody else, the saints of the world. But I don't think God consecrated, cared, put much into me, but that's not what the scriptures say. Jeremiah 29 also says that you probably know these words. I think it's beautiful. For surely I know the plans that I have for you, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. Man, sometimes don't we need that? Then you will call upon me and pray to me, and I will hear you. When you search for me, you will find me if you seek me with all your heart. What a beautiful image that is. So we see that in the creation narrative. We see that in the Old Testament. We see that in the New Testament. Ephesians 2:10 says, for we are what God has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand to be our way of life. And then there is that Jesus person, the central character of the Christian faith. He is an affirmation of God's relatability and God's knowability to us. You want to know what God, living like God calls us to, looks like? Look at the person of Jesus. You want to know what God cares about? Look at Jesus. You want to know if God understands our pain, our suffering, our difficulty, our frustration, our disappointment? Look at Jesus. Jesus' life, being here among us, is an affirmation that God knows our struggles and our realities. And here's the deal. This truth gets repeated all throughout the scriptures. We could go through 100 examples of it, but we seem to lose track of that pretty often. So rather than pointing at all the examples, I want to talk about how sometimes we lose track of these truths. We lose sight of them. I wonder if it's not because we spend so much time bouncing from one thing to the next. I mean, honestly, when was the last time you sat down and just sort of reckoned with your intimate createdness, with who you are? We move so quickly that we don't have time to take stock of that, and we can lose track of it. And if it's not like we incidentally lose track of this, there's plenty of things beyond our busyness that will explicitly tell us differently, give us different ideas, that we aren't good enough or skinny or pretty or smart enough, whatever the case is, that we don't have worth until we've proven ourselves, until we hit a certain income level, until we achieve a certain kind of status, that our past is too messy, our minds are too scattered, our questions and doubts are too big to make us worth much of anything, at least until we change. We run into these messages in marketing and advertising. We run into them in conversations that we have with other people. We have internal dialogues that repeat them in our heads over and over. And so oftentimes we look at all of these truths, all of these stories, at the person of Jesus, and we say, yeah, I don't think that's talking about me. But it is the consistent witness of our faith that those messages are talking about you. So when was the last time that you reckoned with this? The notion that you were made by the God of the universe. As Psalm 139 says, that you were fearfully and wonderfully made, that you were intricately woven, that God has some awareness of all the days of our lives, and that there's nowhere that we can go from God's presence. The psalmist says all of that in Psalm 139. I mean, maybe this week you just need to read Psalm 139 till you believe it over and over again. And look, I get it. These are big existential questions that we're talking about, right? Like our createdness and God's relationship to us. And sometimes we're just trying to get through. I hear you. I hear you. In Donald Miller's book, he talks about growing up, that he in high school and college, he would sometimes just suddenly realize that he was alive and human. It would just like hit him as he's walking to school, as he's laying in bed, just this awareness like, oh man, I am alive. I'm a human being. Did you have that? I think a lot of us have that. I did, in sort of that coming of age time of our lives, that we become aware of the bigness and the smallness of all of the world, of the power and the fragility of life all at the same time. I think it's a beautiful thing, and yet sometimes we lose that wonder at some point. We get a little bit older, we stop thinking about those things. We've lived long enough to just become accustomed to it. Again, from Miller, he says, I think that we get robbed of the glory of life because we aren't capable of remembering how we got here, to this place, to this moment, because we're born and then we slowly wake up to everything until we're 26. It's like God is turning the lights on one at a time, and the experience is so slow that you could easily come to believe that life isn't that big of a deal, that life isn't staggering. But friends, it is. It is staggering. You are staggering, complex, intimate, beautiful, and messy, strong, and so dependent, confused and yet so brilliant. You're known, created, and loved by God. You were on purpose, and you have a purpose, and your story is uniquely yours. And it is uniquely needed in community and in the world. So all of these things are staggering and sometimes unbelievable, like maybe too unbelievable. Like sometimes we struggle because we know our lives. Not the projected life, not what we put on camera, on social media, but we know like our real lives. And maybe they're messy, but maybe they're just boring. Maybe they're difficult. Maybe your stories have parts that aren't clean and tidy, that are dark, that are challenging, that honestly you don't want to reckon with, that aren't Sunday school material. This is the reality. We have a God who creates us and names us and speaks us into being, that we are characters in this grand narrative that God is telling in the world, that we've been written and known and loved. And yet life can seem so ordinary and unpurposeful that we lose ourselves in it. Or we can have people telling us the opposite, that we don't matter until or unless, that we aren't significant until this happens or that. That's the tension that we're kind of talking about this morning. That's the beginning. That's the basis for a good story, is really grappling with who the character is, with who you are. Being honest about it. How many stories are about characters running from their own truths? So here's my question. What would it be like for you to trust the words of the Scriptures? To learn to listen to that still small voice, the voice that is so easily drowned out by all of the noise of the world, by our own doubts and our own disappointments, by reminders of what we've done and what we've left undone, and of all that we've broken and all that's been broken in and around us. That still small voice, what if we listened to that? What would it look like if we trust the one who made us and trust that the one who made us didn't make any mistakes? Let me say that again. What would it look like if we trusted the one who made us and trusted that the one who made us didn't make any mistakes? That what was spoken into being wasn't an accident, and that same voice is crafting purpose and redemption even in the midst of the messiest, most difficult, most damaging and painful realities that we've put on the world and that the world has put on us. What would it be like to trust that voice? So a few weeks ago, I was up in Nebraska, and I was out when I say like I was in the middle of a cornfield, I mean, I pretty much was in the middle of a cornfield. I was at this little retreat center that is in the middle of giant cornfields all around, and the paved road stops where I was. And so we're out in the middle of nowhere, and one night, one of my favorite things happened, and that is that this beautiful, massive thunderstorm moved in. Now, I grew up in Kansas, so when there is a tornado watch, I go and watch for a tornado because that's what I do. When there's a storm outside, I go look at it. Some people are like, lightning, you should go away. I'm like, let's get a lawn chair and watch. So that's what I did. I went out and watched this, and there was rain on and off. But you know in movies when they show thunderstorms and there's like just flashing going all the time and there's strobes everywhere, and you think like that doesn't really happen that often. Usually there's not that much lightning. Okay, there was that much lightning. It was unbelievable. And it was almost all cloud to cloud lightning. And at one point you could see the storm move in from the west, and you could see the front. You could see the clear sky and the storm. And I stayed out there until the whole storm passed by, and you could see the clearness on the other side of it. And there was lightning going on like all over the place across the sky for well over an hour. And I just sat watching it. Every once in a while there would be some cloud to ground lightning. And I was just overwhelmed though by all of this power and this continuous rolling thunder that I heard throughout all of it. I was just so overwhelmed by all of it. And as I was sitting there, and as I was thinking about that this week, sort of came to this realization. Now listen, I'm not a weatherman. I don't really remember exactly how all of it works. I know that thunderstorms happen something like this. Like there's cold air, and there's warm air, and it all comes together, and then it sort of crashes. And there is so much pent-up energy that it just begins to blow up in all kinds of directions. And that's the thunder and the lightning that we get to hear and see, and that it happens all over the place. And so it's like the atmosphere, the skies have all of this potential, and then it all meets, and then it all explodes in this amazing and awe-inspiring display. It all comes bursting forth. And I was thinking about you and I. We're a mixture of cold and hot, of good and of struggle, of beauty and of challenge, of great power and great dependency. That's our lives. And we have so much potential. We have so much capacity. We have so much energy. And guys, I'm not talking about productivity and checking things off a list. I'm talking about something so much bigger than that. We have so much possibility within us. And when it goes off, man, like you're going to notice, the truth of the matter is that sometimes it goes awry. All of that builds up. We don't have good outlets with it. We don't have good boundaries. We don't take good care of ourselves. And it goes in sort of dangerous directions. But if we harness that and reckon with who we are and who God has created us to be, oh man, the beauty and the power and the possibility that we have, that you have, as the central character in your story, an important character in the story that God is telling in the world. What an amazing and awe-inspiring thing that is. So friends, here's 2 challenges for you this week. You as the center of your story, I want to invite you to do 2 things. First of all, I want you just to marvel at it all. Like I asked earlier, when was the last time you reckoned with just the amazing fact that you are created and known by God? I want you just to sit with that. Maybe you read Psalm 139 over and over and over again until you believe it, but just spend some time like really reflecting on the amazing nature of that truth. That's your first challenge. Here's the second thing. As we're beginning to build throughout these next 4 weeks, this idea of a character who wants something and overcomes conflict to get it, I want to give you a moment to just sort of in an exercise to help reacquaint you with you. And so here's what I want you to do. As you look back over your life, I want you to think of 2 big turning points in your life that were positive. where something changed. You pointed, and it was like they changed for the better. So maybe it was you got a new job that was a great fit. Maybe it was that you met the right person at the right time. Maybe it was that you realized what your purpose was in life. 2, maybe 3 of those things, turning points in your life. The second thing that I want you to think about is 2 turning points that were maybe negative. Like maybe that job and a little bit of identity that you had tied up into that, you lost it and it changed. Maybe you lost the wrong person at the wrong time. Maybe you realized that you were chasing after something that you didn't even care about and was never going to fulfill you. I want you to think of a couple of positive turning points and a couple of negative turning points. Characters are developed. They don't just drop out of the sky. It's true in the stories that we consume and in books and on the screen. It's also true in our lives that we just didn't appear like this. That we have been formed not only before our birth, but throughout our life. That we've been shaped and nudged and led and called by a God who loves us, and by the community that surrounds us, and by good and beautiful things that go on each and every day in proximity to us. But sometimes that development happens so slow that if we're not careful, we get robbed of the beauty of life. So as we embark on this journey, I want you to take a little bit of time this week to get to know you. And we'll talk about where we're going and what it is that we want and aim for and what it is that we're called for in the weeks ahead. So take some time to do those reflections and see what it is that you might uncover as we discover more of who we are and more of God's story. Let's take a few moments for reflection.